Once upon a time, a girl named Stella went to the village market to buy some food. It was almost New Year's evening, and her father had given her some money to buy ingredients for the celebration. Filled with excitement, Stella rushed off to the village market. She decided to buy some fresh vegetables, which seemed to be more affordable than those sold in the big stores. She arrived at one of the popular vegetable sellers in the market and began to sift through the produce on sale. After a few minutes, Stella caught sight of an incredibly beautiful amulet among the vegetables, which seemed to grab her attention. She immediately set the amulet aside and continued to search for other items she needed. Not long afterward, another young woman grabbed the amulet that Stella had set aside and tried to pay for it. Stella, filled with fury, left the market and marched home in anger, without buying any food. She was extremely angry, as she could not believe the injustice that had been done to her. She told her father all that had happened, and her father advised her that in life, some things are not worth killing oneself over, and that Stella should visit another vendor instead. Despite being pissed, Stella decided to do as her father advised. A few days later, Stella decided to visit the village market again, this time to another vendor. To her amazement, she saw another amulet, which looked exactly like the one that was taken away from her. Without wasting any time, Stella paid for the amulet and returned home, extremely excited. She tried on the amulet and could not believe how beautiful it looked on her. The beautiful amulet reminded her of her late mother, who had something similar when she was still alive. The thought of this moved Stella to tears, as she hung the amulet in the corner of her room. This was a few days before New Year's festival, and Stella's father informed her that her twin cousins would be coming over to theirs to spend the holiday with them. Stella was so excited to hear this, as she had not seen her twin cousins in a very long time. The day of their arrival came, and Stella was so delighted to reconnect with them after so many years. They spent their time laughing and talking, and before they knew what was happening, it was already night. Stella bid them good night as she returned to her room to sleep. It was the eve of New Year's festival, and Stella was extremely happy at the thought of wearing her special amulet the next morning. By midnight, Stella woke up to realize that she could not move any part of her body. It was as if something was holding her down, making it difficult for her to move. For hours, she remained stuck on the bed, struggling to regain control of her body. Once morning came, Stella felt as though a weight was lifted from her body, as she stood up from her bed, terrified. She rushed to talk to her father but realized that he was no longer in his room. Confused as to where her father could have gone so early, Stella decided to check on her twin cousins and realized that they too were nowhere to be found. This was so concerning, as Stella wondered where they could have gone. She waited for them for hours, but her father and cousins did not return. It was New Year's Day, and Stella could hear the jubilation of her neighbors. She walked around, asking everyone she came across if they had seen her father, and one of her neighbors revealed that she saw Stella walking out of her hut with her father and cousins trailing her behind. Stella looked at her confused, as she could not remember anything of such happening. She returned to her room and tried to wrap her head around what her neighbor had just said. As she was thinking, Stella realized something strange about her amulet. It had some strange muddy stains on it, stains that weren't there the day she hung it up in her room. Confused as to how the stains got there, Stella's mind was taken back to her strange experience during the night when she felt a strange presence in her room and was unable to move. Desperate for answers, Stella rushed out of her hut in search of her father and cousins. She searched the entire village for them and came across a strange old woman who told her that the answers she sought were right in her home. The woman said to her that the amulet she bought from the market was behind all that was happening. Stella asked how this was possible, and the woman informed her that the amulet was enchanted by a restless spirit and that the amulet had the ability to possess its owner. This explained why her neighbor saw her walking out of her hut with her father and cousins that night. Stella, now filled with shock, asked the woman if she knew where her father and cousins were, and the woman told her to return home and wear the amulet, as only then would she be able to find the answers that she so desperately yearned for. Stella thanked the strange woman and returned home. She stared at the amulet for a while, and could not believe that the amulet was enchanted by a restless spirit. Stella feared what would happen to her if she eventually wore the amulet, but the thought of her father and cousins in danger filled her with so much courage that she decided to put on the amulet. Immediately, Stella noticed the strange spirit taking over her body. She found herself walking to an unknown destination. Stella was so conscious of all that was happening around her, despite the fact that she no longer had control of her body. She found herself walking for hours to an unknown place, deep in the forest. Not long afterward, she arrived at a very big hut in the middle of the forest. They walked into the hut, and Stella was so eager to find her father and cousins in the hut, but the hut seemed to be empty and surprisingly quiet. It had an eerie feel to it too, and this terrified Stella, who wondered why the spirit was there. She began to panic and did everything possible to connect with the spirit but couldn't, and this frustrated her greatly to know that she had no control of her body. She felt like a puppet being controlled by an external force and hoped that she made the right decision to wear the amulet. However, Stella noticed something strange about the spirit in her. It seemed to be searching for something in the hut, as it moved her from one room to the other, ransacking the entire hut. Stella tried to speak to the spirit again, but to no avail. Before she knew what was happening, the spirit took her out of the hut and began to walk briskly. Stella felt helpless, as she had no control of all that was happening. It was now getting dark, and Stella could not believe that her New Year's turned out to be such a terrible day. The thought of something terrible happening to her father and cousins terrified her greatly, as she continued to plead with the spirit to take her to them, but the spirit ignored her as they arrived at a second hut. This time, the spirit stood at a distance and stared at the hut. Stella wondered why they were there, as all the spirit did was stare at the hut without making any attempt to move. Suddenly, Stella noticed tears pouring down her eyes. It was the spirit crying, and Stella knew that she had to connect with the spirit to understand all that was happening. She tried speaking to the spirit again, but got no response from it. So, Stella then decided to sing a song that her late mother sang to her whenever she was sad. Immediately, the tears pouring down her eyes ceased, and Stella heard a still voice that asked her where she learned the song. Shocked to hear the spirit speaking to her, Stella told the spirit that her late mother sang the song to her whenever she was sad. The spirit then revealed to her that the song reminded her of her late mother too. Stella was so grateful that the spirit was now communicating with her, so she asked the spirit why she was crying, and the spirit told her that the house in the distance was her home. She revealed that a few years ago, she met a woman who seemed so nice to her. At the time, she was having several issues with her husband and needed someone to talk to. So, when she met the strange woman, she narrated the issues she was having with her, and the woman listened and advised her on what to do. That was how she became friends with the strange woman, who became her very good friend and visited her home at intervals. One day, however, the woman invited her to her own home, and she gladly went. Little did she know that the woman she called her friend had planned evil for her. When she arrived at the woman's house, the woman handed her a beautiful amulet that she made for her and asked her to try it on. Immediately she wore the amulet, she slumped to the floor and realized that her spirit was now trapped in the amulet. All the while, she never knew that the woman was a witch who envied her life and wanted to be like her. The witch then took over her body and killed everyone in her home, including her husband and children. She then hid the amulet in the forest and took over her life. Stella was so shocked to hear the spirit's story and asked her if the witch had taken over her body as well. The spirit responded that she had, but for the song Stella sang that connected her to the spirit. Stella then asked the spirit where the witch was, and she pointed to the hut in the distance and told her that the witch was the vegetable seller who sold the amulet to her. Stella was so filled with anger and marched straight to the hut in the distance and knocked on the door. The witch opened the door and saw Stella standing there, which shocked her. She wondered how Stella had found her, and Stella narrated all that the spirit had told her. Seeing that the witch had nowhere to run to, the spirit left Stella's body and charged straight at the witch. Before she knew what was happening, Stella saw the witch sprawled on the floor, gasping for breath. Stella's father and cousins then emerged from the room in the hut, shocked to see Stella standing there. They could not believe what was happening, but Stella narrated all that she had been through and how she met the spirit that saved them all. Stella's father and cousins hugged her so tight and thanked her for saving their lives. Stella also thanked the spirit, who smiled at her and told her that she was finally free to be with her family in peace. Stella and her family returned home that night, thankful to be alive. Despite all that had happened, Stella was extremely grateful that she was able to save her family. The next day, Stella went back to the market and confronted the vegetable seller who had sold her the amulet. The seller claimed not to know what Stella was talking about, but Stella was certain that the woman was the witch that the spirit had told her about. Stella demanded the return of her money, and the vegetable seller grudgingly complied. Stella returned home and decided that she would no longer buy anything from the vegetable seller. That New Year's turned out to be a very different one for Stella and her family. They learned to appreciate every single day of their lives, and Stella decided to bury the amulet deep in the ground so that no one would fall victim to it again. From that day on, Stella vowed to always listen to her father's advice, and she cherished every moment with her family. And so, Stella and her family lived happily ever after, always thankful for the gift of life.